Welcome to Dial It In, a podcast where we talk with fascinating people about marketing, sales, process improvements, and tricks that they use to grow their businesses. Join me, Dave Meyer, and Trygve Olsen of BusyWeb as we bring you interviews on how the best in their fields are dialing it in for their organizations. Let's ring up another episode. Welcome to our summer series on Dial It In. This week we're talking to Shel Holtz. Shel is one of the original podcasters and is incredibly prolific in the communications and marketing world. It was fantastic fun to hear his take on where marketing is going and how to take advantage of technology while maintaining credibility. Shel has literally written the book on PR and marketing, and he's one of my favorite mentors in the marketing world. Enjoy this episode with Shel Holtz. Trygve, I have a special treat for all of us today. And he's an old friend of mine and someone I've known forever.
I declare shenanigans because I checked and I looked because I was really excited, and Where the Sidewalk Ends was one of my favorite books growing up, but that guy's dead. So I don't have any idea who.
Shel Holtz. Shel Holtz. I actually have, if you're watching our video.
Not Bill Silverstein.
Not Silverstein, the better Shel, the kinder, gentler Shel.
That changes everything.
And he's a multi-book author. He is one of the original OG podcasters. He just celebrated 20 years and with his For Immediate Release podcast with Neville Hobson. And I couldn't be more delighted to have Shel with us. So Shel, welcome.
It's a pleasure. Good to be with you both.
Of course. We have an official bio. And I might as well let Trygve do that one because I want to do a little bonus. We have sponsors for our podcast, and so we like to share a little bit about that. But let's learn a little more about Shel first.
Just for the record, though, you're not the little kid who grew up in Texas in the 90s and then went to Caltech and lived with the kid from Roseanne. That wasn't you?
Not me. Is that what AI told you?
All right. I got to hold on just one second. Shel Holtz is a renowned communication strategist, author, and speaker with over 4 decades of experience helping organizations elevate their communication practices. As the principal of Holtz Communication Plus Technology, Shel has been at the forefront of integrating traditional communication strategies with emerging digital technologies. He's a sought-after advisor for Fortune 500 companies and industry leaders, offering expertise in employee communication, public relations, and digital transformation. A prolific writer, Shel has authored several books on corporate communication, including one from Dave's MBA journey, and regularly shares his insights through his long-running blog and podcast For Immediate Release, which I think crossed the how many episode mark?
Oh, around 1,800 or so.
I don't think I've done 1,800 things in my life, let alone 1,801 thing. So Shel's passion lies in helping businesses connect authentically with their audiences, navigate change, and stay ahead in evolving communication landscapes. With a wealth of knowledge and a proven track record, he's widely regarded as one of the leading voices in modern corporate communications. Ladies and gentlemen, Bazinga himself.
And I should point out that's an old bio. I retired my consulting practice over 7 years ago and returned to the client side. I am Senior Director of Communications at Webcor, which is a commercial general contractor and builder in California, headquartered here in San Francisco, and having a blast doing it. Everything else there is still correct.
But thank you. Thanks for doing it, Shel.
We're going to have to get the Chinese AI since
the better one?
Yeah. We had wasn't working.
The brand new one.
This is so cool. We're obviously longtime fans and just in awe and super excited for you to be here. So I have questions, but Dave, I'm sure you have questions, but Shel, what's on your mind these days?
AI is top of mind these days. As it's really just beginning to make inroads into communications. I spend most of my time doing internal communications, and it's proven to be incredibly useful for internal comms. And with the external comms I do, huge time savings and more to come. I've been playing with some of these agent demos and looking at some of the ways that can reduce the time spent on a lot of truly mundane drudgery that's very common in communications practice. So very excited about the potential for all of this, and a little worried as well.
And I think it's challenging to keep up with technology. And I know you've always been one of the people that is the least toy averse of all of my communications friends. Like you're always playing with something and have a new toy in your box. And as a matter of fact, as we were setting up, not only do you have green behind you on your green screen, but you have a full screen that you can pull down at will. That's impressive kit. I love it.
Yeah, these two sets of green screen that are taped to my file cabinet and my walk-in closet door are just to project something instead of having posters there. That way I can have something different all the time. But if I need a background, I've got a full green screen that pulls down the way those old school screens for showing a movie in class. If you remember those now, the TV monitors, but they used to have big screens that they pulled down. So that's what I've got hanging from my ceiling.
That's hands down the most impressive. The only other one that I saw was even closer was I saw a guy who had figured out to have a big green halo on his chair, Game of Thrones style. So anytime he moved around, it would still have that green. But I like your setup for sure. I think what's really fascinating is I know we're going to talk a lot about communication strategies, but as we're recording, this was, I think, 3 or 4 days after OpenAI's operator came out, which now you can ask ChatGPT to do anything browser related. I saw a demo of a guy who asked ChatGPT to book him a flight to Indianapolis, and it did it, the whole thing, up until it was time to edit in the credit card information. And it was both titillating and terrifying all at the same time.
I did a demo. In fact, the video is up on my YouTube channel and LinkedIn, but this was using Anthropic's Claude, which had released a demo version of an agent. The risks involved in having it run on your desktop at this point are still being ironed out. So this one runs on a virtual desktop that you end up installing in order to play with it. But what I had it do was first visit my company's website so that it could learn what our areas of expertise are and what market sectors we operate in. Then I had it go out and find industry conferences coming up in the next 12 months that are still looking for speakers, and find the conferences that aligned with our market sectors and our areas of subject matter expertise. I asked it to come up with a strategy for approaching these conferences, and then to list the conferences in a spreadsheet with the URL for the website for the conference, the deadline for submitting a speaker proposal, and some other information. And I basically sat back and watched while it did all of this. It was really fascinating because over on the left-hand side of the screen, it showed you what it was doing. In the main screen, it was doing it, but on the left-hand side, it was actually showing you the code that it was using, and then in plain English, what it was doing. And for every step that it took, it grabbed a screenshot and put it in that left-hand column. That's how it saw what it had done and what it needed to do next. And it just continued to go through this process until it had populated the spreadsheet and written the document, which is all pretty impressive. That would have been a 2-day job for an intern.
Absolutely. Wow.
And it took about 10 or 15 minutes with this particular tool. And once they're ready for prime time, probably 2 or 3.
It occurs to me that we are 3 monster AI nerds all on the call together. And but for our listeners who might not know about it or are a little afraid of it, Shel, can you explain the difference between an agent and AI on the whole?
Well, what we have with generative AI right now is chatbots. And chatbots basically are a text field where you enter a prompt. Your prompt can be detailed. It can be many steps. You can use priming in your prompt. But basically what you're looking for is a response. And then you enter another prompt and you get another response. With agentic AI, it will take many steps autonomously in order to achieve a goal or perform a task that you have set out for it. It could be to book a vacation. For example, book a vacation for me and my wife to Hawaii. So it would check my calendar and my wife's calendar. It would find a week that worked for both of us, book the flight, book the hotel, maybe book a couple of restaurant reservations, a rental car. It'll just go through all of the steps. And at some point, when the security issues have been ironed out, it'll have my credentials to log into my accounts, and it will have access to my credit card numbers and use them. That's a ways away. Those security issues are still problematic, but that's the type of thing you can expect this to do. So you can imagine what this might do in the field of public relations, in communications, in terms of some of these, very mundane tasks that we have to perform all the time.
Yeah. I want to get, I think we could probably spend hours together talking about AI, but it's such a privilege to have you here. And being that you're one of the sort of the originators of the art form, can you talk a little bit about how did you start figuring out what a podcast was and building it and doing it? Because I didn't really get knowledge of it until almost, 10 years ago, and you're 20 years in.
Right. And working with a co-host, because Trygve and I have been co-hosting. We do great when we present together, but when we podcast together, we have to do hand signals.
Oh my God.
And all of that stuff, so we don't stomp all over each other. It's wonderful.
Oh, you see, now Neville, my podcast co-host, is in the UK. He was in the Netherlands when we first started. So our whole experience was doing this remotely. And video is a relatively new addition. We were using Skype initially. If there had been no Skype, there would have been no FIR. That's was one of the requirements, because how else do we record when we're on opposite sides of the Atlantic Ocean? I found out about podcasting by reading blogs. Blogs were big back around 2019, and podcasting was just getting started, and some communicators were writing about it as a potential channel for messaging for organizations. So I figured out how to listen to podcasts, which was not easy in 2019. You needed to have podcatching software. And at that point, there was only one. It had been created by Adam Curry, who was at one time an MTV VJ. I think he was from their second batch of VJs. But he was a tech nerd, and so he wrote the software code for the podcatcher. This allowed you to find a podcast and retrieve the file. And this was possible because a guy named Dave Weiner had modified RSS to include what he called containers, in this case for an MP3 file. So that's how the podcatcher worked. And Adam and Dave worked together on this to make sure that the two would work in sync. But once you had the podcast in the podcatcher, you had to move it from that to a device where you could listen to it. So you had to be pretty dedicated, pretty committed, and have at least a rudimentary understanding of how files moved online and from your computer to another device in order to listen. But I was pretty convinced that there was indeed potential here for the business world. And I figured the only way I was going to learn how to podcast was to do one. That's the only way I would have the kind of experience would allow me to talk authoritatively to clients about it. So I decided to start one. And as I was listening to podcasts, with one exception, they were all one person just babbling into a microphone. The exception was a very rude, very funny show called The Dawn and Drew Show. It was a married couple just talking trash to each other. But I liked the dynamic, and I thought a co-hosted show would probably be better. Most of the podcasts that were out there also were about podcasting. So I decided ours would be about communication. I reached out to Neville. I knew Neville through the International Association of Business Communicators. We had both been assistant sysops in the PR and marketing forum on CompuServe back in the day.
Wow.
And I think it was 1997. I can't be sure of this, but maybe 96. There was a conference, IEBC conference in Boston, where we had members of IEBC Hyperspace, CompuServe members who had joined that particular SIG, who were at the conference, would go to a session, take notes, run back to their room, type up their notes, and share them in the forum. And we actually live blogged one session where questions from people were being read to the speaker on stage. We think it was the first time anything had ever been live blogged. And we enjoyed the experience. So I got in touch with him and said, hey, I don't know if you've heard about podcasting, but I ran down what I was thinking. And he said, it's funny, I was thinking the same thing and I was going to call you.
So I think one of the things that I found fascinating, especially since we just went through an election, is a lot of people credit the art form as an alternative media source.
Podcasting, yeah.
Absolutely. And Neville and I have talked about this a bit. The fact that this has gone so mainstream that people are now quoted in the news for things that they have said on podcasts. It could be political. It doesn't have to be. It could be social. It could be gossip, entertainment, movie star type gossip. But just like Twitter at one point became the place where noteworthy people said things that got quoted in the media, now it's podcasts. I thought Trump spent far less money than, but he got onto a lot of podcasts and they all were of a type. They were all bro type podcasts. So he was targeting a demographic, which was actually pretty shrewd. And I think it paid off. I think Joe Rogan probably paid off more than anything else. Right. But it does speak to the kind of influence that podcasts can wield now. So it's come a long way since Neville and I started. There were about 400 podcasts back then. And I think there are maybe one or two of those that are still around. Right. I think the Geek News Central, Todd Cochran's podcast, is still going.
I think, and just to put a little context, one of the folks that's credited as being the godfather of podcasting is Mark Maron, and For Immediate Release is 4 years older than the What WTF podcast. You've been doing this since 2005.
Yeah, January 3rd, 2005 is. We actually sent out our first file. I don't remember the date, but it was late December 2004. It was a test just to make sure that the file would actually go where it was supposed to go and could be retrieved the way it was supposed to be retrieved. But yeah, our first episode, which just is terrible, was January 3rd, 2005.
I am terrified to re-listen to our first episode.
Yeah, I remember it well, and I've learned a lot since then. So absolutely.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
So is podcasting something, as somebody who's really a communications legend, do you recommend businesses, people, how do you figure out if they should do a podcast?
Well, I think you figure it out the same way you figure out any medium that you're going to use in a communication strategy, and that's by going through a strategic planning process. I think there are far too many people who become enamored of a technology and try to shoehorn it into a strategy rather than starting with your goal and working down through the various layers of a strategic plan and getting to the tactics and saying a podcast would reach this demographic that we're trying to reach. The topic that we're addressing would lend itself to this. It's part of a strategic plan. There are so many great technologies out there, and all of them require a strategic process to determine whether it's going to help you ultimately achieve your goals. Because you can create a podcast and get 1 million listeners, but if it doesn't move the needle on something, why'd you do it?
Bingo. Yes. So as like when you started with WebCore, and it's been a while, 7 years, but did you recommend that they start a podcast, or how did you bring them into the modern age?
Yeah, well, WebCore does not have a podcast. We did a limited podcast for the company's 50th anniversary. So we found some employees who had left the company. We went to some of the original founders of the company and did some interviews. We talked to leaders and employees who have been there a long time. We have one employee who's coming up on his 43rd anniversary with the company.
Wow.
So we talked to these folks, but this was a very limited thing. The VP of marketing and I have a vision for a podcast. What we don't have is the bandwidth to actually spend the time to produce it or the budget to outsource it. So we're just going to sit on it and hopefully bring it to life at some point. But I can tell you that I listen to a lot of construction podcasts, and they are all interview shows. Not to slam an interview show, I'm on one right now,
Right.
but they're all interview shows. And some of the podcasts that I have been enjoying lately are not interviews. They contain interviews, but they're pieced together to tell stories and multiple voices and narration. And this runs the gamut from something like Serial, which sort of kicked off that genre, to one of my favorites, which is the good old Grateful Dead cast. I even wrote a post about this. I am a Deadhead. I'll freely admit this, but if anybody wants to get schooled on podcasting, listen to an episode of this. You don't have to be a fan to get what they're doing with this show, which is weaving a story together with snippets of multiple interviews. They could have maybe 30 interviews that were conducted from which they extracted segments to assemble a narrative that includes little snippets of music and again, the narration. And that's not quite what we're looking to do at WebCore, but I want to get more into the storytelling and let the other folks doing the other podcasts do the interviews.
For sure. But as you build that, and I think it'd be a perfect pivot time for us to talk about more strategy and communications as an IABC fellow, any credential that I think you can get in media and public relations, I think Shel has. As that strategic tactician, are there ways or like a narrative that you like running your clients through when you are running your solo practice? Or as you're building that through, how are you taking those communication fundamentals and keeping them relevant for your customers?
When I was an independent consultant, one of the services that I offered was audits. And I find audits to be incredibly useful. And by the way, an audit is defined as an external view of your operations. So when I hear somebody saying I'm conducting my own communications audit, I said, it's a review, it's a study, it's an analysis, it's not an audit by definition. I'll agree that you can conduct your own communication audit the day the IRS lets me conduct my own tax audit.
I want to interject because there's an important thing that happens to me all the time is that any communications audit or any marketing related audit that people do, that the initial reaction is, I don't want to pay you to learn about my business. And then the response that everyone should almost universally give is, then you shouldn't have called me in the first place. Is that an example of a confounding answer that you got that you had to go back at? Because that was what I hitched on when you were going through what you shared, is what was the kind of answers that made you pause?
Yeah, I can't remember what the feedback was from that particular audit, probably 15 or 18 years ago. But it would just be a disconnect between what we heard in our interviews and focus groups and what the survey said. It might be that people are very proud to work here, and then we get the survey back, and there's always a net promoter score question in the survey, and people, I wouldn't recommend this place to my family or friends. We want to know, why did we hear one thing and then another? I mean, we did one audit. This was for a TV network that does live programming. I'm not going to name them. And we interviewed the CEO and a rather famous person at the time. And he questioned the need for an internal communications department. He said, there is so much cachet to working here, to being able to, when you go out with friends, to say, I work here. That's all we need to have a great culture and enthusiastic people who want to do a great job because they want to keep working here. We get out to the front line, who were producers of shows and the like, and they say, we don't trust the leadership of this company as far as you can throw them. I go, okay, why is that? And they say, well, at the beginning of the year, every year, they tell us what the business plan is. And then with the monthly updates, February, March, April, all the way through October, we keep hearing how great everything is. And then just like clockwork in October, the budget cuts hit because things aren't going well. So they haven't been truthful with us. So we go back to the CEO of the company and tell him this. And he says, yeah, but if we told them what the real situation was, it would end up on the smoke. This is true. A consultant is somebody who borrows your watch to tell you what time it is, but you are so close to this that having that outside perspective is vital. And now that I'm back on the client side, I pay to have an audit. I know how to do an audit. I've done dozens of them, but I'm inside. I'm too close to this. I need somebody coming from the outside and bringing that perspective to the audit. And the way I always did audits was it started with interviews with the communications team. Why did you call me in the first place? What problems are you having? What issues are you having? What challenges? What needs to be fixed? There's some reason you wanted to do this. You don't think things are going along just swimmingly and you don't need this. So you start with the interviews with the communications team. Then it's interviews with the senior most leadership of the organization. And if I couldn't talk to the president and CEO, most of the times I would turn down the gig.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who set the agenda. And we would spend a fair amount of time with them, but the two most important questions we asked or information we solicited was, tell me about a communication around here that you think went really well, and tell me about one that you think went really poorly. Then we would ask, what are the key things that you want employees to understand that they currently, from your point of view, don't? And then that would lead to other questions, and we would be able to flesh out the information we needed. We would take that, and then we would do some focus groups. And these focus groups were designed to inform the survey that we would send out next. So we were trying to uncover issues that people had with communication and messaging, and we tended to look at teams. So we might do a focus group with frontline members of the HR team and the IT team and the accounting team. We would get out into the field. I remember we did this for ConAgra Foods, and we got out to mills, for example, where they actually grind the grain. We did this for hospitals and got out to clinics and the like. We did this for a TV network and went out to talk to the various teams on different shows. Then we would run the survey. And then we'd get the information back from the survey and we'd analyze it. And invariably, we would have questions. Oh, why did they answer this way? This is not what we've been hearing. So we did another round of focus groups to get at why the answers that confounded us came back the way they did. At the same time all this was going on, we were doing a content analysis, a deep dive. We would get access to the intranet. We would get an inbox and all of the emails that went to all employees. We would be able to see any materials that were not digital. We would get print publications and the like. And then all of this would lead to our recommendations. And the recommendations were consistent with strategic planning principles. Here are your key goals. And then these are the objectives that you're going to seek to achieve. And we recommend the following tactics to do that. And it could be anything from a new channel to rethinking the mix of content that you're providing. I remember we had one client who brought us in because they thought their intranet rocked. They thought it was a great intranet and no one was reading it. And so we went in and we looked at the intranet and came away going, you know what? This is a great intranet. Why in the world is nobody paying attention to this? They contracted us to do the audit and we get to the focus groups. And what we learn is from the front line, yeah, we think the intranet is great, but our managers tell us that if we have time to look at the intranet, we must not have enough work to do.
Oh,
You had middle management that was actually preventing people from going to the intranet, even though the message from above at the most senior levels of the organization was this is the hub of information and knowledge in the company. This is where people need to go. That the middle managers who had targets that they had to achieve if they were going to make their bonuses were saying, no, if you're on the internet, you're not working. As great as their internet was, we had to find other ways to get this information into the hands of people that their bosses wouldn't object to. And it took talking to people to figure that out. Gun blog within 10 minutes. And I said, okay, so you don't trust your employees and your employees don't trust you, but you think you don't need internal communications. Let's talk about it. There's a disconnect, right? And so often, because they're in there every day doing their job, the people who are in charge of communications are unaware of this because nobody's asked them to look for it. They're just getting the information out, presuming that their audience is consuming it and presuming that they're aligned in what they're communicating with what's important to the leadership of the organization. And they're just unaware of these things. And that's why those outside views of the process can be so helpful.
I think it's a great story, but I think the initial reaction people would hear, that's just a TV network. That doesn't apply to me. And I would say, I think that does apply because even, you might not be turned into and I might not be that big of a story, but not trusting your employees turns around and that does bite you with places like employer reviews, things like that. It gets around with an informationally flat world that we're in today.
Exactly. I have similar stories out of hospitals and other kinds of organizations, but also did social media audits and other kinds of audits that were communication focused, but really just looking at your processes for producing and distributing this stuff and measuring it and coming back with recommendations to make it better.
And things keep getting more complicated and the world is getting more polarized and AI is muddying things up by making it super easy to generate content that may be subpar if you're not paying that much attention. So do you find in your leadership role in your current company where you're both internal and external, is there a push-pull between the external brand and how you're communicating internally?
I'm very fortunate in having landed at this company. No, the external brand is very consistent with the way things are in the organization. The leadership is committed to building a culture that is consistent with what we tell people the culture is. It's great. It makes life easier, certainly, than it could be.
Love it. Yeah. And I don't know enough about your current company, but is there a big work from home contingent in there? And is there a struggle now as things are starting to pull back?
No, we have a policy that says you should be in the office 3 days a week. If you are in a job that lends itself to being able to do that. We have a couple of employees who are full-time remote because their jobs enable them. But for example, this week, because I have contractors at the house, I'm working from home 4 out of 5 days. Nobody cares. Nobody cares if I'm working here 5 days. Nobody says, how come you're not working from home this week if I'm in the office 5 days? I go where it makes sense for me to be, and the culture allows me to do that. Now, of course, we build stuff. We're a commercial contractor. We build airport terminals, hospitals, office high-rises, and residential high-rises, museums, hotels, big stuff. California Academy of Sciences, Moscone Convention Center. So these things can't be built from home. You have to have the labor force, the carpenters and the laborers and the plumbers and the electricians, and they need to be there on site, which means the project team, the project engineers and the project manager and the superintendents and the foreman and the construction managers, they all need to be on site. Most of the people in a construction company don't have the luxury of being able to work from home. And during the pandemic, they were considered essential workers. It's not one of those industries where this seems to be much of an issue. I do find the whole return to office debate just fascinating because I see very little evidence to support the mandate to return to the office full time. I have always made decisions about what I support. And that includes my political perspectives based on data and evidence. I support what works, not what aligns with whatever cultural mandate seems to be going around at the time.
And I agree. And we've dealt with this at BusyWeb for a while. We've always been at least partially virtual, even before it was cool or necessary. And now we have probably a quarter of our team comes in regularly to the office. But it's completely, today, our office is completely full because we all had meetings that we needed to make too. But it's more about trusting your team. And it's easy as a team of 25 when you're dealing with thousands like Apple or whatever, or any of the big, massive like Meta, how are they doing all that stuff? Google with their huge campus right out by you. And the fact that I don't know if they still have the ability to eat within 7 minutes of any one place on campus, but something tells me that maybe the work from home thing has changed all of that. So
Yeah.
I for one hate going to the office, and it's not because I don't like the office, but and this is the God's honest truth. One of the leading manufacturers of mini donut machines is about a quarter of a mile away from BusyWeb.
well,
So
it's heavenly.
3 days a week, the entire place smells like warm cinnamon for the better part of the day.
Oh, I love going to the office. I like having the conversations with people I wasn't expecting to see. But I got to tell you, if I am spending the day editing video or writing a strategic plan or knocking out articles for the intranet, one, being in the office is going to be distracting. We have an open office setup, which means that I can't close the door. Even if I did, people would knock. So I would constantly be interrupted, and you know what it's like to get your focus back on what you're doing after you've been interrupted. I'd rather just be here in my home office, nose to the grindstone, knock it out. Plus the hour it would take me to get there in the morning and the hour and a half it would take me to get home is now time I can spend working on those strategic plans or articles or videos or what have you. And everybody's fine with that. But if there are meetings, absolutely, I want to be in the office. I also want to get out to projects, which there are only two of us in the communications team. So we're stretched pretty thin, even more thin for the next 6 months as we implement a new integrated internal communications platform. So we get to do that while we're doing our regular day-to-day job. So I don't even get out to projects as often as I'd like. But this is a very visual, very physical industry. And it's fun to get out there and be with the people who are actually building the buildings.
Yeah, I have that same problem. One of our clients has all the tools on all the Discovery shows that I really like, and different axes things, and has all the cool saws and everything. And I just want to come and play. And no, we're working here. You need to go away and go back and build something. I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface, Dave. What about you?
Yeah, we are. And I would love to maybe at some point have you back if you're game for that, Shel, because I know
I'd love to.
That we're bumping into for you. But the big thing that I want to leave us with, and maybe this is a teaser for part 2, is the ability to manage and be strategically artful while still embracing the fact that the world is constantly changing and technology is constantly improving. And I don't know if there's ever been a time, certainly in my short 30-year history of communications, that it's been more weird and more just kind of question marks at every turn. So I'd love to explore that more with you, Shel, if we get a chance, because staying important. Yeah. Cool.
Let's definitely have you back for another episode, because I think in the political climate that we're in right now, where half the world doesn't believe what you believe and is angry at you because you believe what you believe, it becomes even more harder to communicate effectively to everyone at the same time. And so if you can come help us untangle some of that, I think we'd love to continue.
And try to do that in a fragmented media landscape.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So any final thoughts, Dave?
Just the thing that struck me through our too brief conversation, frankly, is the
big thing that you need to be uh, able to do is embrace technology without letting it derail for the sake of the shiny toy. And I love what you do, Shel, and I've been a huge follower and I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I love the technology, but it's just a tool to help you get your job done. And you have to always start with what your goal is. And how's that technology going to help you move that needle?
Shel, one final question before we go. We always give our guests the opportunity for naked self-promotion. So where can people find you, and tell us the name of your podcast one more time?
The podcast is for immediate release. It's at firpodcastnetwork.com. We record a monthly long form episode, and it was really long for January, about an hour and 50 minutes. But we also do short midweek episodes that tend to run about 15, 20 minutes. They're single topic. And you'll find them along with some other shows over at the firpodcastnetwork.com. I do have a website and a blog at holtz.com, but where you'll find most of my commentary is on LinkedIn.
Awesome.
Thanks, Shel.
Thank you, Shel. Looking forward to being a longtime subscriber. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. So this has been another episode of Dial It In. I'm Trigby. He was Dave. We are produced, as always, by Andy Witowski and Nicole Fairclough. And with apologies to Tony Kornheiser, we will also try to do better the next time.